Hello, this is Dr. Anthony Pasick with the Wellness Connection. Today we're going to talk about leaky gut and what it is. Well, if it's really real, it is. What it is, how do we measure it? What does it mean to you? What do we do about it? These are some of the questions that we hear all the time, from patients, and really you've probably heard about a leaky gut, on even on the news or certainly in your Facebook, feed, or maybe somebody that is close to you has talked about a leaky gut, or you've heard somebody on social media describing it and wondering, hey, is this at the root of some of my problems? So what is a leaky gut? Well, let's talk about what your gut should be doing first, and then we'll describe what can happen there. Your gut should be a barrier, and that's an important concept to look at. We have several different barriers in our body. The best example is really your skin, right? So a barrier is just something that's going to separate two areas. So your skin is a barrier to allow stuff inside of us, like our blood, to be separate from stuff outside of us in our environment. And there's other barriers. The inside of your gut is a big one, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. But there's a similar barrier inside your lungs. We also have a barrier between our blood and our brain. That's called the blood-brain barrier. Your eyes, in a sense, have a barrier like that as well. Your urinary tract has a barrier that should be there. Those are some of the main ones that we would encounter and see some challenges with. The whole point of a barrier is that it's supposed to be intact, right? An intact barrier is almost like, on a microscopic level, if my fingers were just sort of held together really, really tightly here on a cellular level, that's what we want to see. So if you imagine on your skin, for instance, your skin is intact, it's doing its job. If you had a bunch of microscopic, tiny little wounds, little holes in your skin, that would be a bad situation. That could lead to you getting an infection. Stuff outside of that barrier, bacteria, things like that, could get into your bloodstream through the breakdown in that barrier. So when we think about your gut barrier, your intestinal barrier, it's kind of the same thing, just on the inside. Now, if we think about it, this is a new concept sometimes to consider this, but when you eat food, you chew it up in your mouth, you start to swallow it, it goes down your esophagus, into your stomach, into your small intestine, into your large intestine. And then eventually that food gets broken down, we absorb those nutrients, and the rest gets turned into waste, right? That whole process, even though it happens inside of us, is actually outside of our body. That's crazy. The whole process of digestion takes place in kind of one big hollow tube, right? So if you imagine that, the stuff that's inside of our intestines, when it's being digested and broken down inside there, even though it's inside this tube, our body considers that space outside of us. So just like your skin, if we kind of looked at the inside of your gut, and if we took a cross section like this and then we're looking at it like a tube, and then if we kind of flipped it open and looked at it like this, where the top space here is the inside of your intestines, it would kind of look like this picture right here. So this is a bit of a diagram of what your gut could look like. The white space up at the top, we call that the lumen. That's the same thing as the space that's inside the intestines there. That's where your food gets broken down. That's also where all these microbes, all the bacteria and yeast cells and all these other things that are part of our microbiome, all these microbes live. It's where we break down our food into nutrients, vitamins and minerals and things like that. And the whole point of your gut is on a microscopic level to absorb these things. So we want to get the stuff that we need out of food to be absorbed through the cells that line your gut. The cells on the lining here are what we're looking at. This is just like skin cells. These are very similar to skin cells. And you can see on the left here, they're very tightly connected together. This is an intact gut barrier, and that's good. What that does is it kind of keeps stuff out that's not supposed to get in to your blood, okay? So if we have, for a variety of reasons, there's a lot of triggers for a leaky gut. There are certain foods that can trigger a leaky gut. Sometimes it's foods that you have an inflammatory sensitivity to, like a food sensitivity. So there can be testing done for that. We've discussed that, but we'll certainly do another video on food sensitivities specifically. If I had to pick one food that's the biggest culprit for causing a leaky gut, it's gluten. That's probably not surprising to hear, but there is new research within the last few years that says if you're a human and you consume gluten, you'll probably end up with a leaky gut, right? And that's pretty powerful information, right? A lot of times we get that question: should I be eating gluten? Is it safe for me? Is it not? In the short term, if you consume gluten, you're probably doing what we would call inducing a leaky gut. There's also evidence to say, well, maybe we should think of a leaky gut like almost like a fever. It's something that can happen as a response to something, and maybe that's a normal sort of defense, but it should only be temporary, right? Like if you get food poisoning, for instance, maybe you would need to, for a short time, develop a leaky gut, and then it should go away. That's kind of the thought behind why gluten can cause a leaky gut. So food can do this. There are certainly infections in the gut and elsewhere in the blood that can cause a leaky gut. There are medications that can do this. Certainly the stress hormone cortisol can do this. There's a few other things. Those are some of the big things we look at. And then absolutely inflammation. So if you look on the right side of the screen, we've got this this breakdown, these tiny little holes, these little pores. The little holes can happen in between the cells. They can happen kind of right through the middle of the cell. But we have now all of the contents of that space, those things that are outside of our bloodstream, spilling into or leaking into your bloodstream. That's not good. It's very, very bad. There's a lot of consequences that can come from this. You can get, we can see your immune system responding to foods. We can see very specific immune system symptoms, allergies, asthma, eczema, certainly any kind of skin condition. We often see a very strong connection to inflammation in the gut and a leaky gut causing skin conditions. So we usually need to look inside, have more of an inward out approach when we have skin problems. A lot of times when we're talking to patients in the clinic, the focus has been outward in. If you have something like an eczema, put things on topically, do treatments that are focused on the skin, but really we have much better results when we work from the inside out. We can see nutrient malabsorption. So you may be taking certain nutrients and not absorbing them as well as you can if your gut is inflamed and if you have a leaky gut. When all of this goes on for some time, we've talked about this in autoimmunity discussions before, when you have a genetic predisposition and then you have a breakdown in the barrier and then some other type of environmental triggers, this is the combination of things that lead to autoimmune disease. There's a lot of autoimmune diseases. We've talked about that at length for sure, but certainly the biggest one by number is Hashimoto's. That's the one we see most often. There's a bunch of other ones, Really, autoimmunity is just mistaken identity. Your immune system, which is supposed to ignore your body or even protect it, becomes confused and it starts to direct an immune system attack at your own body parts. Essentially, any body part is up for possibility, up for grabs of being attacked by your immune system. They all have different names. MS, multiple sclerosis, is when nerves are attacked. Rheumatoid arthritis is when joints get attacked. There was a question on a previous video about rheumatoid arthritis versus regular arthritis, osteoarthritis or degenerative arthritis. Those things are different. Rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune condition. Regular osteoarthritis is not necessarily an autoimmune condition, but there could be a connection between gut health, gut inflammation, and for instance, what foods you're eating, what what maybe infections you have, and the development of regular osteoarthritis, degenerative arthritis, and certainly the pain associated with that is often an inflammatory response that doesn't that can be improved by changing your environment and improving your gut health and what foods you're eating, for instance. So hopefully that helps for the person who asked that question. And then inflammatory bowel disease, that's things like colitis and Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and lupus, where there's not really one particular body part attacked, but many different body parts. There are many, many more. We have a backlog of autoimmune topics. If there's anything that you would like to see discussed specifically, please let us know. So this is a leaky gut. This is absolutely real. That's really one of the first questions we get from many people. And in fact, I like to point to this particular research article title even. I'm going to make this as big as I can for those that are looking on their phone. This is a very powerful title. This is from a research article. Dr. Fasano here is probably the leader in this field, and he's not some fly-by-night researcher. He's working through Massachusetts General Hospital for Children. They are associated with Harvard, I believe. The title of this article is "All Disease Begins in the Leaky Gut." That is a huge statement. Not some disease or autoimmunity or gut issues or skin problems or allergies. He is literally saying all disease begins in the leaky gut. There's a little bit more detail here, but one of the things he talks about is zonulin and gut permeability. And he's talking about the role of some chronic inflammatory diseases. But to be able to say something like this is pretty profound, right? There's one area that I'd just like to highlight. It's an area that I'm particularly interested in and passionate about, and that's the brain, right? So let's just go back to the title of this article. We'll come back to this picture in just a second. But for instance, there's these things called axes in your health. It's really when two different body parts communicate with each other, right? There's a gut-brain axis. Your gut and your brain communicate. Is intestinal inflammation a silent driver of Parkinson's disease? That's pretty crazy. Does your gut being inflamed cause or promote Parkinson's disease? The answer is absolutely yes. So the picture shows us in one way how a leaky gut can have impacts outside of the gut. So for instance, there's inflammatory triggers. That's number one in the picture. That can be food, that can be microbes. Those are probably the two biggest things that we would see. These inflammatory triggers are inside your gut. And then we have intestinal inflammation and permeability. Permeability is the other word for leaky gut. In the intestine, these things can spread. This is a little bit of a tricky word here, but let's just talk about inflammation, systemic inflammation. That inflammation basically leaks out into the blood and spreads all over. But there is, in Parkinson's disease in particular, I think this is pretty interesting, these little purple lines right here that kind of go up and down, and then you see these little squiggles kind of working their way up. This is your vagus nerve, and your vagus nerve is what's called a cranial nerve. A cranial nerve comes out of your brain, and the vagus nerve starts in your brain and goes all the way down to the intestines. They know from this research that the inflammation and the leakiness in the gut will basically travel upwards on the vagus nerve right here, up into the brain, where it creates brain inflammation, neuroinflammation. And then here's the other thing, blood-brain barrier permeability. Just like there's a leaky gut, there can be a leaky brain too. So then this inflammation in the brain can lead to neurodegeneration, brain tissue neurons degenerating. Parkinson's disease is the one in particular that they're studying here. There's a tremendous connection between gut inflammation, leaky gut, and Parkinson's disease. Also, things like Alzheimer's disease and other dementias as well. So that's pretty powerful. When we go back to how do we fix this, what do we do about this, right? So, well, we can avoid certain foods. For instance, we can change the microbiome in your gut. We can work on controlling inflammation. We can hope to manage stress. We can certainly try and bring some medications out of the picture. If I'm not mistaken, I think antacid medications, proton pump inhibitors, like omeprazole and those types. I believe they have been shown to cause a leaky gut. There's many more that do that as well. So then there's other things that you can do. There are several nutrients like glutamine and very specific types of licorice and aloe vera and very certain types of specific types of probiotics and anti-inflammatories, digestive enzymes. There's a lot of stuff that can be done to help improve a leaky gut. So I hope this helps. This will be maybe the first in a few discussions we can look at about the leaky gut and its other connections here. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to either respond to this message or leave a comment below. We'll be happy to dive into other topics that you'd like. Thank you.